Zyra Velthus adjusted the flowing fabric of her ceremonial robes. As she glided through the sterile corridors of Research Facility Omega-7, the silver threads woven into the midnight blue material caught the artificial light, creating patterns that shifted like stars across a dark sky. Her elongated ears twitched with barely contained irritation. She had far better things to do than observe the latest batch of primitive specimens her family's foundation had acquired. Lady Velthus, the facility director, a nervous Vellani male, named Jorik, scurried to keep pace with her long strides. I believe you'll find today's demonstration particularly enlightening. Zyra's violet eyes remained fixed ahead. I sincerely doubt that. These creatures you've been collecting are barely sentient. What could they possibly demonstrate beyond basic survival instincts? The research facility was one of dozens operated by the Velthus family across the Outer Rim. Territories. Officially, they studied lesser species to better understand evolutionary development. Unofficially, Zyra knew they were little more than exotic pet collections for the amusement of Vellani nobility. She had seen the holovids her cousins shared. At dinner parties, humans stumbling through simple puzzles, reacting with fear to holographic predators, displaying the predictable behaviors of any cornered animal. This particular specimen is different, Jorik insisted, his webbed fingers dancing across a data pad. We acquired him from a damaged transport vessel in the Kepler sector. The records indicate he was some sort of scholar, though of course, that's likely a mistranslation. Zyra laughed, the sound like crystal chimes in the empty hallway. A scholar? Among these primitives, really, Jorik, your imagination exceeds your scientific rigor. They passed through a series of security doors, each scanning Zyra's genetic signature before allowing entry. The facility's heart was a collection of observation chambers, each housing different species collected from across the galaxy. Zyra glimpsed the usual suspects, the crystalline Jektar with their geological thought processes, the gaseous nebulon entities that communicated through color changes, and finally, the human containment area. The chamber beyond the reinforced viewing window was designed to appear comfortable by human standards. Furniture scaled to their smaller frames, lighting adjusted to simulate their home star's spectrum, even some primitive entertainment devices. It was, Zyra reflected, much like the elaborate habitats in the Vellani zoological gardens back on the home world. There, Jorik pointed through the transparent aluminum barrier, specimen designation H4471. Zyra looked where he indicated and felt her breath catch. The human was seated at a small table, surrounded by what appeared to be books, actual physical books, not data crystals or neural downloads. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he bent over one of the volumes, making careful notations on a pad of paper with a primitive writing implement. What is he doing? She asked, moving closer to the window. We're not entirely certain, Jorik admitted. He requested access to our linguistic archives. We assumed he wanted pictures, perhaps simple symbols. Instead, he's been cross-referencing ancient Vellani texts with samples from 17 other galactic languages. The human, Marcus, according to his file, looked up suddenly, as if sensing their observation. His eyes met Zyra's through the barrier, and she felt an unexpected jolt. Human eyes were supposed to be dull, animalistic. These were sharp, intelligent, and utterly aware. Marcus set down his writing tool and approached the window. When he spoke, his voice was clear and confident, carrying through the chamber's audio system. Lady Velthus, I presume, your reputation precedes you, even to the Outer Rim territories. Zyra stepped back, startled. Not only was he speaking Vellani, he was speaking it with the formal inflections reserved for addressing nobility. Impossible. The translation matrix must be malfunctioning. But Marcus continued, switching seamlessly to High Vellani, the ancient ceremonial dialect known only to the most educated of her people. I assure you, my lady, I require no translation assistance. I've been studying your language for quite some time. Jorik's jaw fell open. That's not possible. High Vellani hasn't been spoken outside the noble houses for 3 centuries. Marcus smiled, an expression that transformed his entire face, making him appear less like a captured animal, and more like, well, like a person. I'm a xenolinguist by training. Before your people captured my research vessel, I was documenting the linguistic evolution of 17 different species across this sector. Villani was actually my specialty. Zyra found herself leaning forward, pressing one elegant hand against the viewing window. You're lying. Humans don't have the cognitive capacity for such complex study. With respect, Lady Velthus, I believe your information regarding human capabilities may be somewhat outdated. Marcus returned to his table and picked up one of the books. This, for instance, is a collection of Villani poetry from the Second Dynasty. The metaphorical structures are fascinating. Your ancestors used celestial navigation as a framework for expressing romantic longing. He began to recite in perfect High Villani, his pronunciation flawless, beyond the twin moons of Zirion's embrace. Where starlight weaves through cosmic lace, my heart sails past the void's dark sea, to find the light that calls to me. Zyra's hand trembled against the window. That poem was from the private collection in her family's estate. She had read it countless times as a child, dreaming of the kind of love that could transcend the vastness of space. How could this human possibly know it? Where did you learn that? She whispered. Marcus set the book down gently. The Velthus family library maintains an extensive digital archive. Before my capture, I spent months studying your people's literature, your history, your culture. I was hoping, he paused, looking directly at her with those impossibly intelligent eyes. I was hoping to make contact, peaceful contact. Jorek scoffed. Preposterous. Humans don't have the technology for deep space communication. But Zyra wasn't listening to the director anymore. She was studying Marcus with new eyes, seeing not a primitive specimen, but a scholar, a researcher, someone who had dedicated himself to understanding her people. The implications were staggering. You came looking for us, she said. Not quite a question. Marcus nodded. My government believed that first contact with the Villani should be handled carefully. With respect for your culture and traditions, I volunteered for the mission because I believed in the possibility of peaceful coexistence. Between our species, the silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of the facility's life support systems. Zyra felt something fundamental, shifting in her worldview, like tectonic plates reorganizing beneath her feet. Lady Velthus, Jorek interrupted nervously. We should return to the briefing room. The demonstration has concluded. But Zyra didn't move. She continued to stare at Marcus. This human who had shattered every assumption she'd held about his species, a scholar who had studied her people's poetry, who spoke her language better than most of her contemporaries, who had traveled across the galaxy not for conquest or resources, but for understanding. What else can you do? She asked softly. Marcus smiled again, and this time, Zyra felt her twin hearts skip in response. Would you like to find out? As Jorek tugged at her sleeve, urging her to leave. Zyra made a decision that would change the course of both their lives. Tomorrow, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. I'll return tomorrow. And, as they walked away, she caught herself looking back through the viewing window, where Marcus stood watching her go with those remarkable, intelligent eyes. Zyra returned to Research Facility Omega-7 the next morning, though she told herself it was purely for scientific curiosity. She had spent the night in her family's estate, reviewing everything she thought she knew about humans, and the cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Every report, every study, every cultural assumption painted them as barely evolved primates. Yet Marcus had quoted ancient Villani poetry with the reverence of a true scholar. Lady Velthus. Jorek greeted her with obvious relief. I've prepared a more comprehensive demonstration of the specimen's unusual behaviors. Zyra waved him off. I prefer to conduct my own observations, thank you. She made her way directly to Marcus's chamber, where she found him seated cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a complex arrangement of data crystals and physical books. He was speaking softly to himself in what sounded like. She paused, listening carefully. Ancient Jektar, she called through the communication system. Marcus looked up, his face brightening when he saw her. Lady Velthus, good morning. Yes, I was working on a translation matrix. The Jektar linguistic patterns share some fascinating similarities with early Villani grammatical structures. Zyra's ears twitched in surprise. The Jektar were silicon-based life forms whose language was considered untranslatable. Due to its geological time references, that's impossible. Jektar communication occurs on timescales of centuries. How could you possibly, may I show you? Marcus interrupted gently. Against her better judgment, Zyra found herself nodding. Marcus activated one of the data crystals, and a slow, deep harmonic filled the chamber, the voice of a Jektar entity. To Zyra's ears, it was nothing but random mineral resonance. But Marcus began to speak, providing translation in real time. The mountain remembers when the star was young, and the valleys carved themselves in anticipation of rain that would not fall for 10,000 cycles. Zyra stepped closer to the viewing window. You understand that? Marcus nodded enthusiastically. Once you realize they're not speaking about immediate events, but about geological memory, the patterns become clear. They're poets, Lady Velthus. They speak of love in terms of continental drift, of loss in the erosion of coastlines. There was something infectious about his excitement, the way his eyes lit up when discussing linguistic puzzles. Zyra found herself genuinely interested despite herself. Show me more. For the next hour, Marcus demonstrated his understanding of languages that most Villani scholars considered impossible to master. He spoke Nebulon color syntax through manipulated light frequencies, translated crystalline harmonic mathematics, and even attempted to explain the temporal linguistics of the mysterious eternal collective. How? Zyra finally asked. How is any of this possible for a human? Marcus was quiet for a moment, his expression growing serious. My lady, what exactly have you been told about human cognitive capabilities? Zyra recited the standard academic position. Humans possess rudimentary problem-solving abilities, basic tool use, and primitive social structures. Intelligence quotient tests place them slightly above the galactic median. For non-technological species, Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. And how were these tests conducted? Standard protocols, maze navigation, pattern recognition, basic mathematical reasoning, in human environments, using human cultural contexts. Zyra paused. Well, no, they were conducted here, using standardized galactic testing methods. Marcus stood and approached the viewing window, placing his hand against the barrier. Lady Velthus, imagine if I captured a young Villani and placed them in a completely alien environment, surrounded by incomprehensible technology, speaking only languages they'd never heard, and then tested their intelligence using human methods, based on human assumptions. What do you think the results would be? The question hit Zyra like a physical blow. She had never considered the testing methodology, had simply accepted the results as scientific fact. You're suggesting that tests are flawed. I'm suggesting that intelligence isn't universal. It's contextual, cultural, environmental. Marcus gestured to the books around him. Humans have been studying language, mathematics, and philosophy for thousands of years. We have universities, research institutions, entire civilizations built on the pursuit of knowledge. Yet your people see us as animals because we don't match Villani cognitive patterns. Zyra sank into a nearby chair, her worldview continuing its violent reorganization. But the reports, the behavioral studies, were conducted on captured, traumatized individuals torn from everything they knew and understood. Marcus's voice was gentle, now, but firm. If you want to understand human intelligence, you need to see humans in their natural element, pursuing their passions, working with their own tools and methods. A long silence fell between them. Finally, Zyra spoke. Tell me about your work, your real work, before you were captured. Marcus's expression softened. I studied xenolinguistics at the University of New Geneva. My specialty was developing communication protocols for first contact scenarios. I believed. He paused, looking directly at her. I believed that understanding language was the key to understanding people. That if we could truly communicate with alien species, we could move beyond fear and suspicion to genuine cooperation. Is that why you learned Villani? Marcus nodded. I spent 3 years studying your people's communications, your literature, your cultural expressions. I learned to love Villani poetry before I ever met a Villani person. The way your ancestors used astronomical metaphors to express emotion, the the complex temporal structures in your historical narratives. It's beautiful. Zyra felt a strange warmth spreading through her chest. You love our poetry. Would you like me to recite some more? Marcus asked with a shy smile. Before Zyra could answer, he began speaking in High Vellani again, his voice carrying the cadence of someone who truly understood the rhythm and flow of the language. In the space between heartbeats and starlight, where silence holds its breath, I found a truth too vast for words, too precious for death. Zyra's breath caught. That's from the lost cantos. Those were thought destroyed in the cultural wars. Marcus smiled sadly. Human archaeologists recovered fragments. From ancient data caches, we've been slowly reconstructing them. Your people's poetry doesn't just describe beauty, Lady Velthus, it creates it. For the first time since arriving at the facility, Zyra truly looked at Marcus, not as a specimen or a curiosity, but as a person. She saw the intelligence in his eyes, the passion in his voice when he spoke about her culture, the careful respect with which he handled her people's artistic treasures. And she saw something else, something that made her twin hearts race. He was looking at her the same way. Marcus, she said softly, using his name for the first time. Yes, my lady, tomorrow, I want you to show me human poetry. His smile could have powered a small star. I would be honored. As Zyra left the facility that day, she realized she was no longer visiting a research specimen. She was visiting a friend, and possibly something more. 3 weeks had passed since Zyra began her daily visits to the research facility, and she found herself counting the hours until she could see Marcus again. What had started as scientific curiosity had evolved into something far more complex and infinitely more dangerous to her carefully ordered life. Today was different. Instead of the usual observation chamber, she had arranged for Marcus to be brought to a private research suite, equipped with advanced translation matrices and historical archives officially. She was conducting linguistic research unofficially. She was giving him access to tools that might help unlock mysteries that had puzzled Vellani scholars for generations. Lady Velthus, Marcus said as the guards escorted him into the suite. He wore simple gray clothing provided by the facility, but somehow managed to maintain an dignity that reminded her he was a scholar, not a prisoner. This is unexpected. Zyra gestured to the array of equipment she had installed. I have a proposition for you. There are certain artifacts in our possession that have resisted translation for centuries. I thought perhaps a fresh perspective might prove valuable. Marcus's eyes lit up as he examined the translation matrices and data access terminals. You want me to help solve Vellani historical puzzles? If you're capable, Zyra said. Though she no longer doubted his abilities, over the past weeks, he had demonstrated mastery of 14 different languages and had begun teaching her the subtleties of human communication, the way they used facial expressions and vocal inflections to convey meaning beyond words. Marcus approached one of the terminals and began interfacing with the archive system. May I ask what these artifacts contain? Zyra activated a holographic display, showing images of stone tablets covered in intricate symbols. These were discovered in the ruins of an ancient temple on Velthus Prime. The symbols aren't Vellani, but they're found throughout our oldest archaeological sites. We've never been able to determine their origin or meaning. Marcus studied the symbols carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. After several minutes, he began typing rapidly, cross-referencing the symbols with databases from dozens of different species. Interesting, he murmured. The base structure is similar to Proto-Vellani script, but there are elements that match ancient human cuneiform. And these markings here, he pointed to a section of the tablet. They're identical to symbols found in Jektar geological records. Zyra moved closer to look over his shoulder, close enough to catch his scent, something clean and warm that was distinctly human. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting these tablets might predate the divergence of our species, Marcus said softly. What if, thousands of years ago, Vellani and humans shared a common origin? The possibility hit Zyra like a stellar wind. That would mean that we're not as different as everyone believes, Marcus finished, turning to face her. They were standing very close now, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. the air between them seemed charged with possibility, with the weight of discovery and something far more personal. "Marcus," Zyra said quietly, "if this is true, if our species are related, it would change everything." He nodded slowly. "The political implications alone would be staggering. It would be much harder to justify treating humans as inferior beings if we share common ancestry." They worked together for hours, Marcus's expertise in ancient languages, combining with Zyra's knowledge of Villani history. Gradually, a picture emerged of an ancient civilization that had seeded both worlds, leaving behind traces of shared culture and language. As the day progressed, Zyra found herself increasingly aware of Marcus as more than just a research partner. The way he got excited when making connections between disparate data points, the careful gentleness with which he handled historical artifacts, the unconscious way he hummed while thinking, all of it was charming in a way that made her chest tight with unfamiliar emotion. "Zyra," Marcus said suddenly, then caught himself. "I'm sorry. Lady Velthus, I didn't mean to be so familiar." "No," she said quickly. I like the way you say my name." Their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away. Marcus reached out slowly, as if approaching a startled animal, and gently touched her hand where it rested on the data terminal. "This is dangerous," Zyra whispered. "I know," Marcus replied, but he didn't pull his hand away. "If my family discovers that we've been, I know. You're supposed to be a primitive specimen. I'm supposed to be conducting objective research." Marcus smiled, that radiant expression that made her forget why any of those things mattered. "Are you conducting objective research?" Zyra looked down at their joined hands, her long, elegant fingers intertwined with his shorter, broader ones. The sight should have been alien, wrong somehow. Instead, it felt perfectly natural. "No," she admitted. "I haven't been objective about you since the moment you quoted Villani poetry." Marcus lifted their joined hands and placed a gentle kiss on her knuckles, a gesture so tender and reverent that it made her twin hearts stutter. "Zyra," he said softly, "I need you to know something. When I set out to make contact with your people, it wasn't just professional curiosity. I had read so much of your literature, studied so much of your art, that I had fallen in love with Villani culture. And now," she prompted, though she could barely breathe. "Now I'm falling in love with a Villani person." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication and impossibility. Zyra felt tears gathering in her eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming emotion. "This is impossible," she whispered. "The best things usually are," Marcus replied, before she could lose her courage. Zyra leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative, and absolutely revolutionary. When they broke apart, she was trembling. "What are we going to do?" she asked. Marcus squeezed her hand. "We're going to figure it out together." Outside the research suite, the galaxy continued its ancient dance of politics and prejudice. But inside, surrounded by evidence of their shared heritage, two people from different worlds had found something worth fighting for. The summons came 3 days later, delivered by a stone-faced Villani courier who waited while Zyra read the formal script. The message was brief and devastating. "Your presence is required immediately at the family estate. Your recent activities require explanation. Patriarch Davos Velthus." Zyra's hands trembled as she set down the communication crystal. Somehow, her family had discovered her growing relationship with Marcus in Villani society. Such a transgression wasn't just scandalous, it was potentially catastrophic for the family's political standing. She found herself at the research facility one last time, standing before Marcus's chamber with her heart breaking. He looked up from his books the moment she entered, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. "Zyra, what's wrong?" "My family knows," she said simply, "about us, about the time I've been spending here." Marcus stood quickly, approaching the viewing window. "What does that mean?" Zyra pressed her palm against the barrier, and Marcus mirrored the gesture from his side. "It means this ends now. It means I have to choose between you and everything I've ever known." "And what will you choose?" Marcus asked quietly. The question hung between them like a blade. Zyra thought of her family, generations of proud Villani, nobility, their political influence, the research foundation that employed thousands. She thought of the consequences of defying them, the exile that would surely follow. Then she looked at Marcus, at this remarkable man who had challenged everything she believed about intelligence, about worth, about the possibility of love transcending species. The choice should have been obvious, practical, safe. I don't know, she whispered, and hated herself for the uncertainty. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. I know what I'm asking of you. I know what you'd be giving up, too. You? Zyra's voice cracked. Do you understand that choosing you means losing my entire world? My family, my position, my identity as a Villani noble? Yes, Marcus said simply. Just as choosing you would mean I can never return to Earth, never see my own family again. They stared at each other through the barrier, both understanding the magnitude of what they were contemplating. Love was supposed to conquer all in the romantic poems they had shared, but reality was far more complicated. There's something I never told you, Marcus said suddenly, about why I was really captured. Zyra frowned. What do you mean? Marcus ran a hand through his hair, looking uncertain for the first time since she'd known him. I wasn't captured. Randomly, I came here looking for you, specifically. That's impossible. You couldn't have known I existed, but I did. Marcus moved to his collection of books and data crystals, pulling out a small device. I've been carrying this since I left Earth. He activated the device, and a holographic image appeared, a picture of Zyra taken at a cultural symposium months earlier. She was giving a lecture on ancient Villani literature, her face animated with passion for her subject. How did you get this? Zyra breathed. Human intelligence intercepted Villani academic broadcasts. When I saw you discussing the lost cantos, saw the way you spoke about poetry and history with such reverence, I knew I had to meet you. I convinced my government to let me lead the first contact mission, because I believed you would understand. You would see past the prejudices. Zyra sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed. You came all this way for me, Marcus nodded. I fell in love with your mind before I ever met you. I fell in love with your voice, your passion for knowledge, the way you made ancient words come alive. Meeting you in person only confirmed what I already knew. What did you know? That you were worth crossing the galaxy for. Tears streamed down Zyra's face now. The romantic gesture was everything she had ever dreamed of and everything that made their situation more impossible. Marcus, I have to go. My family is waiting. I know. He pressed both hands against the barrier. But before you do, I need you to know something else. Whatever you decide, I don't regret coming here. I don't regret finding you, even if this is where it ends. Zyra stood and pressed her hands against his through the barrier. It doesn't have to end. What are you saying? I'm saying, Zyra took a shaking breath. I'm saying that some things are worth fighting for. Some loves are worth the risk. Marcus's eyes widened. Zyra, you can't. The consequences of denying this would be worse. She interrupted. Marcus, you showed me that everything I believed about your species was wrong. You made me question fundamental assumptions about intelligence, about worth, about the nature of civilization itself. How can I go back to that ignorance? How can I pretend this connection doesn't exist? You're sure? Zyra smiled through her tears. I've never been more sure of anything. You crossed the galaxy for me, Marcus. The least I can do is be brave enough to fight for us. Marcus pressed his forehead against the barrier, relief and love, and terror warring in his expression. What do we do? First, I face my family. I tell them the truth about what I've discovered, about human intelligence, about our shared heritage. Maybe I can make them understand. And if they don't, Zyra's smile turned fierce. Then I stop being Zyra Velthus, noble daughter of a proud house, and become something new, something better. What's that? A woman in love with the most remarkable man in the galaxy, regardless of what species he happens to be. As she walked away from the facility, heading toward what might be the most difficult conversation of her life, Zyra felt something she had never experienced before, the absolute certainty that she was making the right choice, no matter the cost. Behind her, Marcus watched through the viewing window, his heart full of hope and terror in equal measure. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The Velthus family estate loomed against the evening sky, like a monument to centuries of accumulated power and influence. Zyra stood before its imposing entrance, gathering courage for what might be the last time she would enter as a member of the family. The weight of her decision pressed down on her shoulders. But beneath the fear was something stronger, certainty. The council chamber was already assembled when she arrived. Her father, Patriarch Davos Velthus, sat at the head of the curved table, his expression carved from stone. Her mother, Lyson, watched with disappointment etched in every line of her elegant features. Her brothers and sisters filled the remaining seats, their faces ranging from curious to openly hostile. "Zyra," Davos said without preamble, "sit." She remained standing. "I prefer to address this matter on my feet." Her eldest brother, Caven, snorted with derision. "Still playing the rebel, even now? You've brought shame on this family with your activities." "What activities?" Zyra asked calmly. "Conducting research, expanding our understanding of xenolinguistics, discovering archaeological evidence that could revolutionize our understanding of galactic history." "Don't insult our intelligence," her mother said sharply. "We know you've formed an inappropriate attachment to a human specimen. The very idea is revolting." Zyra felt anger flare in her chest. "Inappropriate? Marcus is one of the most brilliant scholars I've ever encountered. He speaks 14 languages fluently, including archaic dialects of our own tongue that most Villani have forgotten. He's helped me translate artifacts that have puzzled our researchers for centuries." "It doesn't matter," Davos said coldly. "He's human, and this foolishness now. And we'll arrange for you to be assigned to a respectable research project off-world. The scandal will fade in time." "No." The single word dropped into the chamber like a stone into still water. Several family members exchanged shocked glances. "No," Davos repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "I said no." Zyra activated a holographic projector, displaying the translations she and Marcus had completed together. "Before you make demands based on prejudice and ignorance, perhaps you should see what we've accomplished." The holograms showed the ancient tablets, their symbols now decoded, revealing the shared heritage between Villani and human civilizations. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. "This is what you're asking me to abandon," Zyra continued. "Not just personal feelings, but the most significant archaeological discovery in Villani history. Evidence that humans aren't primitive creatures to be studied and contained, but are distant cousins who developed along a parallel path." Her sister Nira leaned forward. "Studying the translations, if this is authentic, it changes everything." Zyra finished. "It means our entire justification for treating humans as inferior beings is based on false assumptions. It means the research facilities, the captivity, the specimen programs, all of it is built on a foundation of lies." Silence stretched through the chamber as the family absorbed the implications. Finally, Davos spoke. "Even if this is true, it doesn't justify your personal conduct. You've compromised your position, your reputation, and the family's standing. For the sake of an infatuation with an alien." "It's not infatuation," Zyra said quietly. "It's love." The admission sent ripples of shock and disgust through the assembled family. Caven stood abruptly. "That's enough. You've clearly lost your mind. Father, commit her to medical evaluation. Prolonged exposure to alien influences has obviously affected her judgment. Sit down." Davos commanded, and Caven reluctantly complied. The patriarch studied his daughter with calculating eyes. "Zyra, you have a choice. Renounce this madness, submit to family discipline, and accept assignment to a distant research post, or be formally disowned, stripped of name, title, and inheritance, cast out from Villani society entirely." The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence. Zyra felt the weight of her entire life pressing down on her, the privilege, the comfort, the identity that came with being a Velthus, everything she had ever known or been. Then she thought of Marcus, alone in his cell, waiting to learn whether she would choose love or safety. She thought of the poetry they had shared, the discoveries they had made together, the way her heart raced when he smiled. She thought of the future they could build together, bridging to worlds that desperately needed to understand each other. "I choose love," she said firmly. "I choose Marcus. I choose the truth over comfortable lies." The chamber erupted in angry voices, but Zyra barely heard them. She was already moving, heading for the exit and the transport that would take her back to the research facility. "If you leave now," Davos called after her, "you can never come back." Zyra paused at the threshold. "I know." An hour later, she stood before Marcus's chamber, her formal robes replaced with practical travel clothes, her family's communication device disabled and discarded. "Zyra?" Marcus approached the viewing window, taking in her appearance. "What happened?" "I'm getting you out of here," she said simply, interfacing with the chamber's security controls using her administrative access codes. The lock disengaged with a soft chime. Marcus stepped through the doorway, free for the first time in months, and immediately pulled Zyra into his arms. "You chose," he whispered against her hair. "I chose us," she confirmed, holding him tightly. "But we need to move quickly. Once they realize what I've done, they'll send security forces." Together, they moved through the facility, Zyra using her access codes to download the archaeological data and linguistic translations they had worked on together. The evidence of human Vellani shared heritage would be their gift to both species, proof that cooperation was not only possible, but natural. As they reached Zyra's personal transport vessel, Marcus caught her hand. "Are you sure about this? Once we leave, there's no going back." Zyra smiled, the expression radiant with love and determination. "Marcus, you taught me that intelligence isn't about superiority, it's about understanding. You showed me that love doesn't recognize species boundaries. You proved that sometimes the most profound discoveries come from the most unexpected sources." She kissed him then, soft and sweet under the alien stars. When they broke apart, she continued, "I don't need to go back to who I was. I'd rather become who we can be together." As their ship lifted off from the Vellani research facility, carrying them toward a future neither could fully imagine, Zyra felt a sense of completion she had never experienced. As a noble daughter of a proud house, she was no longer just Zyra Velthus. She was half of something new, something revolutionary. Behind them, they left evidence that would eventually transform relations between their species. Ahead of them lay the unknown, dangerous, uncertain, but filled with the promise of a love that had already changed the galaxy. Marcus took her hand as they entered hyperspace, heading for the neutral territories where they could begin their new life together. "Any regrets?" he asked. Zyra looked at him, this remarkable man who had crossed the galaxy for her, who had challenged everything she thought she knew about the universe, who had shown her that the greatest discoveries weren't found in ancient texts, but in the courage to love without reservation. "Only one," she said with a smile. "That it took me so long to realize that some revolutions begin in the heart." As their ship carried them toward the stars, two worlds began to change, one conversation at a time, one discovery at a time, one love story at a time. And in the vast expanse of space, the universe itself seemed to smile at the power of two hearts brave enough to bridge the infinite distance between worlds.